Hi, I'm Tiffany of Team Terror Techies.
Hi, I'm Wit.
Hi, I'm Dan. This is a subject that deals with the core emphasis of the haunt industry. People are going to haunted houses not because they want to just be entertained, but they want to feel scared. And when you're going through that experience, you need to find that fear factor or that scare factor that you're dealing with. Because of that, it's something we usually have to grade. Usually, not all the time. Oh, never mind. We have to grade it all the time. We really do. It's the big important thing. Uh, Grading for this is done on a 1 to 10 scale. That scale is usually broken down to low, medium, and high, depending upon how well you're doing your scares and the factors that are included into that.
The first subcategory that we're going to cover was how scary was it? This category is huge. If you think about whenever you talk about going to haunts with like friends, I get asked how scary was it all the time, like colloquially. So, I mean, if I start talking about a haunted house with someone, that's normally the question that I get asked. So, how scary was it really? Giving my giveaways, the clowns don't really do anything for me. Like, I'm not someone who's phobic of clowns. However, performing as a clown, I know people who are very phobic of clowns. So it's that kind of layer of what I'm going to find scary, or what Dan's going to find scary, or what Wood is going to find scary is going to be different scaries.
Sorry, I'm finding this a little bit funny because I don't find a whole lot scary. Clowns are funny. I don't care if they're sad, happy, murderous. They're still funny to me. And then anytime somebody does the redneck gimmick, I'm like, hi cousins. It, that's just not scary to me. So it's hard to judge something that is scary that is outside of my relative norm. And I can say when I approach that, I'm not judging my fear level because I really don't get scared of that much. I tend to judge either the groups in front or behind me based on how much they're screaming, and my compatriots, and how much they're screaming.
So we'll talk about this a little bit later in kind of Dan gesturing towards me. I feel called out. But I'm very notorious of jump scares. I react pretty violently. Not like punching people. I'm not that person. But like, I'll definitely scream and jump and yip and like make well known that you got me. I've definitely taken a knee before in haunts. Like kind of hit the ground type of thing. Yeah, like that's just it's a type of scare, and that's a very easy way to get me. Even though I could tell like where it's coming from, like a really well timed jump scare, like almost every single time you'll get some type of reaction from me.
This is probably the most difficult category for me because I really don't scare. And on top of that, like, I've had so many years of scare acting that, like, I will walk into a room and usually pick out every single hiding spot that exists. So it's very rare for me to. It's not that it can't happen, but it's pretty rare that I will get got. And so generally, when I'm looking at this, I am looking at like I try to think about it as if the theoretical every person walking into this, how likely would they be to be scared by it? And I kind of grade that based on the technical achievement of like, oh, is this a good hiding spot? Like, well hidden? Would I not be able to expect that this is coming?
The next subcategory that we'll be reviewing is how well did they scare everyone? So this is a subcategory within the scare factor category and group, are they only focusing on one of us going through, or are they kind of trying to hit everybody? A really popular one that you kind of see is like everybody in like the front of the group gets scared more, or sometimes haunts, I guess, reverse it and try to scare everybody in the back to like push people through.
Smarter to scare the back, although the back is also where the most scared people hide.
Yeah.
Which is funny, because then you target the back and they end up... It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. They get terrified for being in the back. Or, they hide in the back because they think they're going to be terrified. Then they end up being terrified because they're in the back, because that's the way to drive people through.
And that's the weird thing, even with us, like, while we're going through, like, well... I don't think we do this, like, intentionally to think about it, but, like, we'll switch positions, like, throughout the haunt. Normally because I'm very intrigued by pop scare, aka I'm screaming, and the two guys just walk past me because they're brave.
Stop.
Or I just stop. I'm that patron, I'm sorry. If you're seeing this and you're like, oh, I hate those customers, I'm sorry.
But this is an important one though, because it kind of shows like how much thought and training has gone into prepping the actors in order to, obviously, if we get like a couple scares in a row that are hitting just the front, like, sure, that's fine, that'll happen. But it's like, is this a consistent issue throughout the haunt, or is it just in certain portions? And it's, if it's just certain sections, that's a lot more forgivable, so long as they're catching everybody. I hate missing scares. I hate missing out on seeing something that happened just because they're only targeting the back and they're too far behind me. It's a difficult thing to be able to get everybody consistently, but the more that a haunt can be consistent in this, the better of an experience it's going to be for the entire group.
And I can't really like bring up this category without mentioning conga lines. Like, conga lines is something that all haunts have to deal with. And, I mean, we know some places do it better than others, but, the conga line thing kind of falls into this story, is, like, are the rooms set up enough for actors to be able to reset pretty quickly and be able to scare multiple people to pushing through a conga line, or is it very much a setup where it has to be almost in small groups and it doesn't really work with conga lines? Or if it does work with conga lines, like, there's a lot more like reset time that kind of happens between it. It could be that, like, I mean, Whit was saying that he hates missing scares, but like, if there's enough scares going on, I mean, that could also help.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I will say that there's the difference between, like, I guess it's more, I hate feeling like I'm missing out because they're hitting only specific people and there's not enough scares. Like, I don't want to be the person that is at the front of the group and missing out on all the fun because they're not hitting everybody appropriately.
Yeah, I've been through houses that it's just chaos, kind of like just what's happening, and so people are getting scared and they're screaming and like people are reacting, and it's not necessarily the same thing that I could see or react to. But that's how they manage and break up their conga lines, is essentially like just barrage and attack people with all of these scares all at once coming from all different directions. But yeah, all of that is kind of like rolled into this category of like, did they scare everyone, or even did they try to scare everyone? Again, like these two guys mentioned, they don't really scare that easily, so it's kind of skewed. It's like, did they scare Tiffany? Is the category.
I did say I'm listening to the group in front and behind as much as I can, because if they're screaming, then obviously somebody's doing something right.
Yeah.
And I can kind of gauge that off of that performance, as well as how many people are shaken when you finally get back out to the midway area. If they did a good job scaring groups, there will be a bunch of scared kids or adults that will be chattering away in groups, and you can overhear that impact.
That's always really exciting to see too. People actually running out of a haunted house.
Yeah.
Like that's promising. I get excited. The next subcategory that we're going to talk about is how predictable were the scares? How were their timing? Is it something that we could kind of see coming from a mile ahead? Or is it something that literally caught us off guard?
So a lot of this is going to go into like the set design of like how obvious are your hidey holes, how obvious are your drop panels, and if you're able to hide those well, that will go a long way into helping your actors stay unpredictable. The other thing for me is also when it comes to timing, if you actually want to get me, don't hit me exactly when like right as I'm expecting you to. Typically, the best way to scare me is to wait actually an extra half second of when I'm sitting there staring at a drop panel and be like, huh, it's weird that nothing happened there at that moment, and it should have. And then if you can that's a great time to catch me. Pro tip.
Pro tip.
I got to agree with that. If I spot the drop panels and I know they're there, that's really not an intimidation factor for me. Now, if you come up with a distraction that gets my eyes off of that and do a misdirect, then hit me with the scare from the side, it might actually have an impact. It hasn't worked for others in the past. You're welcome to try.
And I mentioned this before in another category that we also covered, but having like two actors, timing could be really critical, particularly if they're like a Jack and Jill scare where one of them is like acting like the distraction while the other one's the actual real scare. If that's relevant a lot in the house, I mean, that would also bring this score up, I think, a lot for me. Particularly just seeing kind of like diversity or like timing being like on packed. Like I could think of like experiences of haunts that I've been to that like timing was down. It felt like they did a lot of rehearsals, and it was actually really early in the season, which is amazing, but it felt like the group was very cohesive and like they were just on it. Like it just, everybody, I felt like going into a room or even like leaving the haunt and stuff like that, like I feel like everything was like well oiled, and it should kind of feel like that, at least like on our side, even though it might be crazy and chaotic on the back end. The next subcategory that we're going to discuss is the difference in scares and also like a difference in intensity of the scares. So I'm thinking of scares like you have intimidation scares where you have this big character and they could be like in your face. Is everybody scaring you like that? Because that honestly could like, I guess dull is the word.
It gets old.
I mean, that's repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just, you need to do something different.
And then the difference in scares is like, again, I mentioned I'm very, very jumpy to pop out scares, and people like that. Actors like that. When they get a scare, they get excited. You know this. But are they only doing pop out scares, whereas that's all they're doing? Because they know that if they could do a real time pop out scare, are they constantly doing pop out scare, pop out scare, pop out scare, pop out scare? It's the same thing of having all your actors be intimidation scares. Like, probably works for the first couple, but then you get used to it and you pick up on it. And even, again, like pop out scares being my thing, like, I know it's going to happen every single room. Like, if I pick up on, like, that's just what's happening, then I start trying to look for it more, I guess, is kind of the point.
It becomes your expectation as you're going into every space.
Yeah. But yeah, intensity, a lot of that is, like, kind of like transference of energy. So if the scares aren't really intense, it feels very low energy, like as a customer or patron like going through, like it's, you can feel things dragging. You can tell it's a low energy night, and your scares tend to be like they fall on their face, or the interaction is not really 100% there. I mentioned it before in other subcategories that a lot of these categories that we score on is more how the feeling is throughout the whole haunt. So it's more of like consistency and being able to sustain that feeling throughout the haunt of does it seem very high energy and very intense with like a variety of scares? Does it kind of have like the storyline type of thing where you have like high points and then it calms down a little bit and then it comes back? And I mean, that's fun. I mean, variety is probably what I'm looking for most within this subcategory. I mean, the subcategory is about variety, but it's what I'm looking for.
Could be just an activity difference. You could go from an intimidation scare and then follow that up in the next room with loud noise, flashy light, that's sensory overload, and then go to something that's really quiet and subtle. And just that you've come through two things that are loud and traumatic at that point to something that's very creepy. Creepy would probably be the atmosphere you'd want to settle into. And follow that with a jump scare again. Like, that would be a just constant change-ups.
And you think of it, again, I kind of mentioned it being story, but think about of like writing a story or like reading a book. There's like conflict, major conflict, okay, some resolution, a secondary conflict, and then final resolution, or like big end battle. Like, there's that difference in a story. It's not the same like motive and objective all the way through the story. Like, it isn't just get out of the house. Some are, but there's arguments of who you run into and stuff.
If it's the House of the Dead, you're just trying to get out.
True. But you meet the different characters in House of the Dead.
You do, and then you watch them die.
That's true. How well was the grand finale or the end of the haunt? Like, in theory, when you're going through a haunt, the end should be memorable in some way. What's your send-off? What's the last impression that you have with people? Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could do. I mentioned before in our other video that you could just absolutely throw all that you have and have this very high intensity, absolute chaos, things happening all over the place, very disorientating, like end finale type of thing. What you see a lot is like chainsaws. A lot of chainsaws
chase you out of the end of the cornfield.
Chainsaw Alley. A lot of when you exit the haunt, it should feel like that was the end of the haunt.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be like, oh, am I, like, is it over? Is this it?
Yeah, they should never be confused about exiting the haunt and being like, oh, that was the end. The other thing I will add is make sure your finale doesn't overstay its welcome. I could definitely think of a haunt that I was in where there was a chainsaw alley at the end, but it was a 10-minute chainsaw alley, and chainsaw alley gets really old after minute 2. It completely, unfortunately, like, it undercut what was a pretty good haunt at the time, and I'm glad to see that they actually did a lot better in years after that. But you know, that was kind of a bummer, just to be like, okay, we've seen, you know, it's the same 3 chainsaw people in the same area, and it gets boring.
Did do a haunt once that had an interesting ending. It was kind of anticlimactic, but it was thematic. And the thematic part was you literally take a stairway to heaven. They built a little stair step with a ramp, and you went up through that. But as you're passing through this tunnel, it's angelic figurines and symbology and everything as you exit out, and then you just kind of walk out. It wasn't huge scares up to that point, but it was like, yep, this is the end. You're going to the pearly gates.
Again, what I'm looking for is like some type of finale sometime after, like, if you do have your hero characters, like, throw them in at the end, or, you know, have something like chase through and kind of like continue that out until I get into, you know, the like public parts, or like out from the haunt area. That could even like keep with it, but it's definitely really hard as a customer to go through a haunted house and really wanting to like see like the best of it, and yet still have that feeling of like, wow, like I was expecting more. I don't know what I was expecting, but I was expecting more somewhere.
Yeah, just don't make sure that the end, whatever the end is definitive and clear. Because when it's not, it's really confusing.
Yeah. And going back with like Dan's example, it doesn't even have to be scary really per se. It just has to have like some type of resolution. Again, I like my story example. Like, stories always have a really nice resolution and kind of like everything comes together.